great presentation. And right before we introduce our next presenter, it's like a Jersey thing with Dr. Jones, I would like to just acknowledge the former chairman of the Education Committee of the State Assembly of the state of New Jersey, when many of these reforms were going on. Happened to be my nephew, Craig Stanley.
Hundreds of thousands of child care providers and early care and education professionals every day who are working as we speak on my behalf, for my 9-year-old, and for many of you who have school-aged children, who work really hard to create that sense of confidence and curiosity and character that will be critical in their success, not only in their academic settings, but in life, as they then move up the ranks and become the future members of the CBC. I'm also thrilled to be here because, unlike all of my colleagues on the panel, I represent the families and the providers who are on the receiving end of the policies that we've talked about, who are the people that we study in the various research projects. And so the information I'm going to share with you will be slightly different because their lens is slightly different as they work through life trying to manage all of the barriers we all experience in really trying to do what's best for their children, given what they have to offer. So I'm pleased to be able to offer that perspective to today's dialogue. Crystal Stairs, the organization that I have the pleasure of running for the last 30 years in South Central Los Angeles, works with child care providers and families, primarily low-income families, in that we pay for child care services for families who qualify for government programs. So we manage state, federal, and county contracts. That gives us the unique opportunity to, on a daily basis, be in face-to-face contact with working families, their child care providers, and their children. The name itself, Crystal Stairs, comes from the Langston Hughes poem entitled Mother to Son, where the mother is saying that life for her had been no crystal stairs. There have been places on the staircase where it was bare, and there have been landings and turns and corners, and she's wishing for her son a life of crystal stairs. And when the two black women, Dr. Karen Hill Scott and Alice Walker Duff, founded Crystal Stairs 30 years ago, and we're trying to come up with the name of this organization, their vision was to build a life of crystal stairs for children in South Central Los Angeles, looking at the disparities they experience compared to children from high means neighborhoods. And that's what we've worked to do for the past 30 years. In preparing to come here today, I thought about the poem and those stanzas. They're hanging in my office. Also, ironically hanging in my office is the poster from the 19th Congressional Black Caucus Legislative Weekend in the mid-90s. The theme of that conference was a global crisis, our children at risk. And it made me think, what has really changed? What has really fundamentally changed in many instances for the families and children that I provide services for every day in South Central Los Angeles? Peter Drucker said that the 20th century was the century of business, and that the next century would be the century of the social sector. So we all have been engaging in a very interesting national dialogue here recently on a variety of social sector issues: health care, education, safety net issues in my bankrupt state of California. So I think the question for all of us is to figure out how to include in this national dialogue about the social sector issues that impact the health and vitality of black children. What are the barriers we experience them experiencing vitality? And we've heard from all of our panelists today all of the various socioeconomic barriers to their vitality. There have been some recent studies that have come out of some of the institutions of higher learning in California that suggest for black children, it's not just class. And in LA Unified School District, 4th grade black children, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of parent academic achievement, are falling far behind. So I would argue in this safe place convened by the Congressional Black Caucus that we need to acknowledge that for some of our children, race does continue to matter. There have been some recent studies that augment the studies around vocabulary. And it's not just that our children lag far behind in terms of the number of words they've been exposed to by certain years, but also the kind of words. And so some studies have suggested that the number of harsh, threatening, verbally negative remarks that our toddlers are experiencing and hearing every day from people who love them, want to do better, and for a variety of reasons cannot or don't, also have long-term negative impact on their ability to thrive and survive and have self-confidence moving into academic settings and beyond. I'm not going to go into or repeat all of the national statistics we heard about poverty, but I would argue that, again, many of us believe that the key link to improving the lives of children is not only a solid early care and education experience, but to really have an honest, frank conversation about eliminating poverty. And many of the social programs that we run, we did a study recently that's posted on our website entitled A Step Up But Not Out, where after welfare reform, we attempted to go back and track families who come through the welfare reform program and to see how they have benefited from the child care subsidy, if their incomes have increased, if they've been able to go back to school and really lift themselves out of poverty. And it was one of those situations where my hypothesis wasn't right on it, and so I struggled with whether or not we published this study, because the truth of the matter is, in California alone, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, we have not really put a dent in poverty alleviation. I naively hoped that that's what welfare reform was all about. It was to attempt to lift families out of poverty and create a better life outcome to build a set of crystal stairs for children. We're beginning to see that that's not consistently happening. Some would argue that that means that these programs don't work and we abandon them. Our argument is it means more, deeper, further investments to look at early care and education programs that work and develop those models, but also really be clear about what poverty does to the family unit and how it inhibits the child's ability to truly survive and thrive. To talk a little bit about child care from our perspective. It ain't cheap, we heard that earlier. We've talked a lot about quality, and it's really important the work we do with families that we define what we mean by quality. If we all took a poll in this room, we would all have a very different image of what a high-quality child care environment looks like. From my perspective, it has really several key elements. It's the who. Who is in the setting providing this quality, enriching experience? And let's be clear about who constitutes our child care provider community. Largely women. In my service area, 16% formal workforce is African American, 17% of the formal workforce is Latina. On average, child care providers are some of the lowest paid workers according to the census data. In California, they earn an average of $22,000 a year, which equates to about $11 an hour. They have minimal and inconsistent benefits, and turnover is high. That's the workforce setting that we're talking about, providing this high quality service to our children. So quality, it's the who. It's the what. We've heard a lot about child care settings and the term teachers use. And I think when we think about child care, we often think about the structured child care setting. Of the 25,000 children in South Central Los Angeles that Crystal Stairs facilitates care to, about 90% of them are in licensed exempt settings. What is a licensed exempt setting? That's grandma. That's great aunt. The other large percentage are in family daycare homes. That's Ms. Jones on 49th and Central, who runs a daycare out of her home. And so we have to be really clear about the settings in which our children receive their care and where our children spend 8 to 10 to 12 hours of their day. While I take a bus to work 8 hours, take a 2-hour bus ride back to pick you up from childcare. It's the what. What is the experience with grandma, with Miss Jones in this setting for these 10 to 12 hours? So it's really important as we talk about and develop policies that talk about quality, that we're really clear where the vast majority of our children are receiving their care and those early interactions. It costs a great deal. In LA County alone, to provide child care for an infant and toddler costs more than the fair market value of a 2-bedroom apartment on an annual basis. So to care for my children and to pay for rent It takes my entire salary. We were asked to come here today to really talk about what the future looks like in our field, and are we doing enough? I would say that if our goal is to fight poverty and the social inequities it perpetuates for black children, the policy is clear. It takes investment. We are so pleased to, hopefully as the state of California, benefit from the new dollars made available by the Early Learning Challenge Grant. It's going to be critical that we continue to have these very frank conversations about the barriers that impact our children, continue to elect leaders in Congress who understand it and will continue to fight the good fight, to create the investment, to create policies, to create forums like this so we can all come together, not only look at the research data and what longitudinal studies tell us, but what everyday experience with working class mothers and fathers trying to survive in some of our urban centers across the country, what their experience tells us about what it takes to improve the outcome of black children in America. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. And our final panelist is David Johns.
I'll sit too if you'll indulge me. So Mr. McGinnis talked about the challenge of being in the middle. I just want to acknowledge the difficulty of playing cleanup. The benefit of going last is that it's more probable that you remember what I say. The challenge is that, and especially on a panel such as this, I want to acknowledge how honored and privileged I feel to be in this company. The challenge is that everything we're saying has almost already been said. And so I'll do three things before you. I'm going to share some statistics, I'll share a quick story, then I'll share the Senate perspective as it relates to these conversations. So just to ground us a bit, and this relates directly to the points that have come before us, 3 out of 7 black babies are born into poverty, right? And we're talking about levels of poverty that don't really reflect what it means to be earning and paying to live in today's society. More than half of all poor black children live in 9 states. Among them are Georgia, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, Louisiana, Michigan, North Carolina, and Ohio.
And soon to be California.
And in each of these states, there are some commonalities. Unemployment rates hover, but on average are around 12 to 17%. High school graduation rates for black men hover, but average around 40%. In Texas, they're as high as 58%. Right? In Michigan, we're talking about 33%. There are similar statistics for Latino men. Black students are disproportionately enrolled in special education, something that we've already heard. Black males enrolled in high school are 6 times more likely to be subjected to suspension than white female students. What's interesting, since we're talking about babies, is that black boys, before the point at which they enter kindergarten, are 3 times more likely to be expelled than they are at the time in which they're in school K through 12. I'll say it again, 3 times more likely to be expelled before they start. And so the one thing that I want to clarify is that a lot of it, we've heard a lot today, that this is about pre-kindergarten, and it's about kindergarten. In most respects, that's way too late. Right? Before coming to do this work in the Senate, I had the pleasure of serving as a teacher in New York City. It was one of the most challenging yet rewarding experiences that I've ever had. I had 2 students I'll tell you about really quickly. One of them, Tanaya, one of them, Luke. Tanaya is the girl who most of us know. She spent the time before she came to school being babysat by her grandmother playing double dutch in front of the apartment building. Luke's parents are university professors who made sure that he had access to the best quality education available. And both of these kids show up to my classroom ready to learn in kindergarten. Luke with an expansive vocabulary, a sense of self-confidence, and a belief that he could and would do all things. Tanaya, ready to work, ready to play. And over time, their attitudes started to change at the point at which they found the work to be challenging. Right? Although Tanaya had the spirit, she didn't have the skills. And while she was resilient, which most of our kids are, over time it started to wear on her. Right? What we are really talking about, to be clear, is making it so that all kids, regardless of the genetic code that they've been born into, or the zip code that they've been born into, have access to quality opportunities. right? For far too long, we've had conversations about acknowledging that too many of us don't graduate, that too many of us don't have jobs. What we're talking about now is seizing upon the opportunity to draw down some dollars and some knowledge to create these systems to make everything work. So from a Senate perspective, we are currently working through our process of authorizing the Higher Education Reconciliation Bill. In the House, it was H.R. 3221, the Student Aid and Financial Responsibility Act. In the Senate, it is called the Investing in Students for a Stronger American Act. And in this bill, we address a lot of the things that have been touched upon today. The first thing, and this is a nod to the work that Congressman Scott does, particularly in addressing the cradle to prison pipeline. We focus on ensuring that the dropout factories that we're all well acquainted with, those schools that he mentioned, are the ones that disproportionately fail to graduate the most students, have targeted resources through which they could use to improve their practices. Right? Beyond that, what we're doing is investing the largest federal investment ever in the community college infrastructure to make sure that the individuals who have lost their jobs and who have historically been unable to obtain jobs have access to the training and education that they need in order to get family wage sustaining jobs. So not simply getting a job, but having a job that means something. And then most close to what we're talking about today is our investment in the Early Learning Challenge Fund. The Senate's proposal is $1 billion a year investment over the course of 9 years. The easiest way to think about this grant fund is that we are challenging states to come up with ways to provide high-quality opportunities in a very comprehensive manner to all kids, but focusing on the most vulnerable, low income and then disadvantaged. And those are the populations that we often think about as homeless, right, neglected and delinquent, foster kids, kids connected to the child welfare system, kids with disabilities or developmental delay. Right? These programs have to touch all of those kids, and acknowledging that the separation that was acknowledged in terms of child care, it has to get kids in all settings. Right? And so that is what the Senate is working to accomplish now. And again, we talk about what's changed, what's not changed. These conversations happened before the point at which I entered DC to engage in them. I am privileged to be on this dais now because of the work that people have done to get us to the point to where we are now. We have a president who, for the first time, at least in my living life, has acknowledged the importance of early childhood education. It happened while he was campaigning, and it's happened since then. We have members in Congress. I've had the great fortune to work for Senator Edward Kennedy for the last 3 years, and now I'm working for, so hard to say, Tom Harkin. I'm a senator who's committed to these issues. I took a break because this is a personal thing for me. But members who are committed to making sure that the investments that we need reach the populations that need them most. I'll close by just saying thank you for the opportunity again to speak before you. I want to say thank you again to the members of the CBC who continue to push these issues for our communities, acknowledge their staff who make it all happen, and thank you again for allowing me to share this panel.
Thank you. We're going to go as quickly as we can to the next panel, but we did want to allow a couple of minutes for questions if there are any pressing questions or very brief comments. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for the panel. I read an article in an education journal about children in kindergarten being taught to take standardized testing, and they're not using time for play and imaginative type of learning and experiences. And I'm wondering if you all could maybe talk a little bit about that, and if so, what's going on with that, because I'm really concerned.
You know, I think we all understand notions of accountability, but I think the notion of focusing on instruction is what we really want to do. And I think in many cases we may have sent a terrible message to schools that that the standards are no longer the goal, but the test is the goal. And we got to change that message, because we can't have children spending their instructional time in testing preparation mode. I think there are ways in which you can provide rich instruction that will get children to do just fine on those measures. But to take large periods of time to prepare them for a single measure, I think is inappropriate. And I think we want children to have the best experiences, but we also have to start sending different messages about what is important.
Yes, I'm a kindergarten teacher from South Central Los Angeles, and I actually left and ran for an office in my union because I was losing 17 days a year to preparing 4- and 5-year-olds to take a test. We are killing our children with this bread and water diet, preparing them, giving more instruction on the art of bubbling in scan sheets than in actually art and things that enrich their lives and make them better students. It can't come too early. It can't come too early. It's urgent. We're dying in the field.
Okay, we'll take 2 more questions. 1, 2. Lisa, last 2.
I'm Dr. Shirley Jackson, been an educator many years, senior executive in the Department of Education. I'm on a commission, Prince George's County Commission for Children, Youth, and Families. One of the things that we're having a problem with is what are the models and how do you get into the homes of Grandma and Aunt Jenny in order to effectuate. Now we know what successful programs are, but most of our children are, as you indicated, truth teller, that they're in these homes, these private homes. What are the models? What are the strategies for getting in these homes and upgrading what's happening with these children all day?
So I know you want to take that, but I'm sorry, so go for it.
Absolutely. This gives me an opportunity, especially since I think I've spent most of my adult life, since we talked a great deal about poverty and people who are low income and people who are off the beaten path. Well, most of my adult life has been spent with individuals who fit that category. And most of my childhood life was spent with individuals who fit that category. And it seems to me that one of the things that we are missing is that many of the individuals never get to the program activities that we're talking about. Many of the children never get to the daycare center. They never get to the early childhood education program because education really begins at home. And when Barack Obama was making his State of the Union address, he mentioned education begins at home. Some of us almost jumped out of our chairs because we knew that home visitation, and fortunately we've been able to put into legislation some home visitation activity that we're going to see coming even out of the health reform bill that we're going to pass in the next but there is a tremendous need to actually go into the homes that we are talking about. There is a tremendous need for what I call parenting programs, because many of our parents, especially young parents, don't know much about what it is that you need to do to really get children into where they need to go. And I think that we are missing opportunities when we don't put a little bit of money in these kind of programs, get some people out interacting with individuals, helping to organize them so that they can make use of the resources that are in fact developed. And I think we miss a great deal when we don't do that.
At the risk of being Chris-Nickety, I just wanted to acknowledge 2 things. One, the Senate's proposal, the Early Learning Challenge Fund, a critical element of that is developing and increasing parental capacity. So it's one, making sure that parents understand how to identify and then track progress as it relates to the centers that they might find their children in. And the second thing is that Senator Baucus's health proposal in the Senate includes a $1.5 billion investment in home visiting funds. It relates to these conversations that we're having. Again, it's in the bill as introduced, so there'll be a lot of work to do to make sure that it's protected. You guys calling your members and letting them know that that's in there and that it is something that should be protected would be very helpful.
Over our 8 agency's 30-year history, there have been various government-sponsored programs that supported in technical assistance for early care and education specialists, trained specialists to go out and talk to Ms. Jones. And they've come and gone as funding has been available. We've taken the attitude that Nike says, which is just do it, because we're clear that it works. And so we have a program that we've raised dollars for to help centers in our area get accredited, to seek national accreditation, that we got funding from our First Five Commission. I cover out of my admin expenses. Martha Williams, who's worked for the agency for 27 years, that half of the providers know. She ran our food program and did in-home visits. So I just cover the cost, and we identify providers who take the initiative to say that I want some help. We have a training program for license exempt, because the reality is, in Grandma's heart of hearts, she wants to do what's best. And so when she gets finished telling me that, you know, she raised 6 and they were all just fine, and we finish our conversation about new emerging ideas around early care and education, Grandma will come to us for health and safety training because she wants to know CPR, and then we got it. We have what we call community preschool, where we sit outside and have staff go out, where Grandma can come 3 afternoons a week with her children and interact with early care and education professionals, where we have the equipment and resources. We have a lending library where Grandma can come and say, I heard this sand and water table is great, but I can't afford one, where they can use a library card equivalent and check out tools and resources to bring back to their home to create that high quality setting. So if you're committed to it as a commission, you find the money and you get it done.
And there's also a program called the Nurse Family Partnership with nurse home visits. That has been studied and shown that those families with the nurse coming in, late pregnancy, first year of life, helping the parents reduce child abuse and reduce other problems and help get the child off on the right track, so much so that the arrest rate of those with the partnership visits was 1/3 that of everybody else. Just one of those programs, if you get them on the right track, you can keep them on the right track, you don't have the problems. Yes, ma'am.
Just a very brief comment. My name is Kimberly Jones. I'm with the Council for Opportunity and Education. And I know the bulk of today's conversation has been about early childhood. Just with respect to post-secondary efforts, I know that there's been a lot of emphasis on innovation and new initiatives. And I just want to encourage those of you who are part of the administration, who are members of Congress, to not forget about programs that have been in place for many years, like TRIO, like Gear Up, that are part of the infrastructure already in our communities. That have been neglected recently, and they're already in place, and they are willing to grow and innovate and change, and they're ripe for those efforts. We just want to make sure that they are also getting the same attention when thinking about things like the College Access Completion Fund and other initiatives, because again, they're there, they're in every state, they're in every territory, and they've been there for decades and they work.
Kim, do you belong to any organization that supports those?
Yes, I do.
Do you want to say a little bit about the organization?
The Council for Opportunity and Education advocates for post-secondary education opportunities for low-income first-generation students, primarily students in the TRIO and Garrett programs. We work very closely with several, as I think all the members of Congress who are in attendance here. Mr. Scott, you were at our annual conference just last week, and we count you all as friends. And there are TRIO programs in every single state, every single jurisdiction of the United States, working with kids as young as 6th grade all the way through post-secondary, post-baccalaureate, adult education, and veterans. COEnet.us.
Thank you. I've been told I can take 2 more questions, and then we have to leave. Any more questions? One here, one there. These 2.
I got one, but it's like public broadcasting system has like these programs like, Sesame Street, Read Between the Lines. And if a child is at grandma, does that help them if they don't go to this preschool?
Your question is whether or not programs like Sesame Street help kids and they don't go to preschool?
Yeah, that don't have preschool.
Well, I think the evidence is it doesn't help them as much. And I think that the further evidence is that in the case specifically of Sesame Street, that the real benefit comes from having an engaged adult watch the program with children. That is much more likely to happen with middle-class kids than it is with poor kids. So yes, they should be available. I think there's a limit to how much you can expect to accomplish and how much of the gap you can expect to narrow because of such programs.
But I think beyond sort of the cognitive benefit of kids being in pre-K, something that I think was referenced, but I'd like to make explicit, is that we're also talking about how to make whole children ready for school and for life, right? And so something that many of our children miss out on, and this is endemic in both African American and the Latino community because we are inclined to leverage family care more frequently, is that they miss out on the opportunity to develop those social relationships, to have those interactions, to learn how to share, right? And so when I talked about kids being expelled at pre-K, a lot of that has to do with them not knowing how to follow the rules. Right, and we can argue about whether or not the rules should be there, but the fact of the matter is they're missing out on the opportunity to learn the skills and resources that they need to be successful in those places and in life. And so I think that that's the conversation we should have rather than talking about those things, which should always be there to supplement what they get at school and at home.
I just want to say, I think we can't put too much emphasis on the interaction between adults and children. To have an adult who understands child development, who understands that particular child, interact with that child, expand language, find ways in which that child can be engaged, find ways in which that child can explore. That's what's critical. You can't do it over TV. Sesame Street's fine, but the notion of an individual adult interacting with a child is absolutely critical for success.
Thank you. Last question.
Thanks. My question just gets at the issue of the fact that there's still an academic achievement gap for wealthier and more educated kids of more educated parents in the African American community. And I guess the question is, when does that begin? Because I know Dr. Anderson, you showed the graphic of just the sheer amount of words you hear, vocabulary, and how it breaks out by socioeconomic status. Does that, if you look at that by race, would you still see those gaps beginning as early childhood for kids from parents in the African American community that are wealthier and more educated? If not, where do we see that begin? I know that's a much larger question, but maybe just a snippet around that would be helpful.
That's an excellent question, actually, and unfortunately I can't answer it for you. What I can say is that what we know is that when that gap begins, as young as it does, it only exacerbates over time. And so we know that by the time kids get into the K-12 system, we do see those differences, and we can't disaggregate by race. I don't know if anyone on the panel knows whether or not that data has been disaggregated by race at the very youngest ages.
We do know that parenting has a great deal to do with it. The attitudes of the parents, how much parents are pushing in some instances, are making opportunities aware. I happen to represent an Asian community who are some of the highest achieving students right now in America. And their folks kind of keep them engaged.
Somewhat related is sort of the relationship that the practitioners have as well to the students, right? So Hakeem Adabudi writes a lot about black boys specifically, and I think related to this is the fact that he acknowledges that at 3rd grade, right, the point at which we talk about states identifying how many jail cells they're going to build based on literacy rates. At 3rd grade is a point at which a lot of black boys decide that school is either for them or not for them, and he argues that a lot of that has to do with the relationship that they have had to their teachers, who by and large are white women. And so that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother panel, but I think that there are lots of related ways that we can talk about that making sense.
No, it's a great conversation.
When we mentioned the 3rd grade, that's important because experts have told us that up to the 3rd grade, you learn to read. After the 3rd grade, you read to learn. If you can't read by the 3rd grade, you can't learn after the 3rd grade, and you're on a trajectory to dropping out. That's why it is so predictive of future incarceration.
I've been going to each forum and not being able to just voice a simple concept. I'm from California, and I bring to you concepts that are so simple that have been researched by myself for over 20-something years on how children can be successful, whether they're young children, whether they're youth, whether they're whatever. It's very simple, and it's called parent participation. If you have a forum to put a family into a unit whether it be a support group on a regular basis, you will have success. You will have that child reading at a level where they should be. I know because I've done it, and I've been successful from California. So if
From
we
California, representing low-income parents who struggle to find work, find transportation, having had negative experiences themselves in school, while parent participation sounds logical and reasonable to all of us, there are segments of the population that it isn't that simple. And
Well,
so we have to engage programs and make them welcome
Absolutely,
into the school.
absolutely.
And if the teacher's hostile to my 8-year-old third grader little boy, I'm going to walk into the classroom with an attitude. And that's not a good place for us to start in terms of encouraging my ongoing participation. So it takes work.
I've worked with all of my career with at-risk youth and their families and communities doing outreach, and exactly what you said is what we resolved in terms of the problem. If parents want to come and participate because they feel the desire and have been inspired to come, they're going to find a way, if they have to walk in the rain, the sleet, and the snow, to get the support that they need to better their children. This is the love of a mother, a father, or a parent in general who loves their children and wants the best for their children. I am a living proof of that. I'm a living proof. I'm a living proof.
Thank you very much.
It's the best program that there is.
Thank you very much. And I think several of the panelists noted that parental support is an essential element to good education. Please give our panelists a round of applause. And we'll be starting the next panel as soon as we get the name tags changed.